F1 teams never stand still. It's the middle of the season and the cars already look very different from when they first ran in testing. We've had incremental upgrades, complete U-turns and cheeky innovations. So today we're going to look into our 5 favourites, explaining how they came about and why they enable these cars to go faster. So let's get into it. The first one has been a slow burner throughout the entire season, and it's the side pods. Now, there has been a load of development on these as it matters a lot on these new cars. With the removal of the barge boards, the side pods are dealing with the wheel weight now, but they are also shaping how the air gets to the diffuser and influencing the flow over the top of the floor. So with these 2022 cars producing the majority of the downforce from the floor, it's unsurprising that the side pods are a hot topic. During the first announcements of the cars and testing in Barcelona, there were 3 broad styles of side pods. There was the undercut side pod, or some have called it the high-waisted side pod. At first, Aston Martin and Alfa Romeo ran it. The idea is that you maintain the flow over the top side of the floor using that undercut. It drives flow onto the top of the diffuser and enables it to produce more downforce. But this does lead to a more rear-biased downforce setup, meaning that the car could potentially understeer. However, the side pods are pretty large, and that can shield the rear wheels and reduce drag. So that is a plus point for this style. Then there are the Mercedes Zero pods. Now, people have written these off a little bit now, but I think that's a little bit premature. Merc was struggling with a load of things at the beginning of the season, and they could be influenced by this unusual design, but also they might not. Anyway, let's look at why Mercedes decided to run them in the first place. It allows for a smaller frontal area and will minimise drag, but at the cost of more limited cooling opportunities. It also promotes more downwash on the front section of the floor. So flow is pushed down and out from the front of the floor, and this actually pulls flow under the car. And this is really clever. We always used to talk about sealing the floor, but now the teams are actually pulling flow from under the floor and using it to create a similar effect to the diffuser. The flow expands when coming out of the floor and creates downforce on the front of the floor, making the downforce more balanced front to rear. Then there is the Red Bull style downwash side pod, and this creates the best of both. It creates balanced downforce whilst also being low drag. So it's unsurprising that McLaren, Aston Martin and Williams have moved to this sort of setup. And even Ferrari have made some changes to their side pods to create the same sort of effect. The teams have really begun to all move to a similar style. Next is the ice skate, essentially a skid for the floor. We saw this back in Imola when Red Bull mechanics were moving around a spare floor. It's this small titanium skid that prevents the floor from flexing too far towards the track. And it was back when all the teams were really struggling with the bouncing. It prevents the floor from flexing too far and stalling due to being too close to the track. So it enabled the Red Bull to create more consistent downforce, and since most of the teams have adopted a similar solution. Next are the beam wings, the smaller wing at the rear of the car, beneath the main plane wing. These are pretty important this year, down to how close they are to the diffuser and how important that is to how the entire floor works. The majority of the teams went for a series arrangement, so there are 2 planes that actually work as one, pretty similar to how the main rear wing works. Now, the beam wing is particularly important as it's so close to the diffuser. So the teams are using this to create a low pressure area beneath it, which then pulls flow through the diffuser and improves the performance of the whole floor. So now you can see why the flow to the rear beam wing was so important when we were talking about the side pods a bit earlier. But Red Bull, at it again, came up with a different solution. They stacked the rear wings on top of one another in a sort of biplane arrangement. This allows them to direct more airflow than with the stacked arrangement, leading to improved performance of the diffuser. But then it also enabled Red Bull to entirely remove it at lower downforce circuits and cut down on the drag. And that is very clever from the Red Bull designers. Then there are the inlet tunnels. So the strakes that are on the inlets to the aero tunnels that create the majority of the downforce on the cars. The teams are allowed these upright fences to condition the air on the way into the tunnel. Now, these changes are insanely complex, and I'm not going to pretend I know exactly what they are playing at, but we can get an idea of the overall goal they're aiming at. See, they can use these strakes to do a number of things. First would be to channel more air under the floor and then expand it and create downforce at the rear of the car. Alternatively, they can turn these vanes to create outwash, so the air is forced out from under the side of the floor, creating that diffuser effect that we spoke about earlier. And that enables the teams to create some downforce further forward on the car, in case, again, they need more front-end grip. Or the teams can actually lower the intakes like Ferrari have done to promote more airflow to the rear beam wing. So all of the teams have been playing with these inlets to balance these effects, because there will be a sweet spot for each car. And finally, there is the genius Aston Martin rear wing, which I'm convinced the other teams will copy later on in the season. They have somehow managed to come up with this really unusual design that circumvents the regulations. It allows them to create these clever end plates, which in turn creates a lot more downforce, but at the cost of a bit more drag. We made a full video about that here, so you should check that out. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe if you've not already, and I'll catch you in the next video. And by the way, we've chosen someone to come and drive the Formula 1 car in a couple of weeks. So congratulations to Ricky for winning this prize.